Before we start, think of a constitution as the skeleton of a state. It's what gives it its shape. A constitution establishes three main elements. First, it determines the conditions for ensuring that the rights and freedoms of citizens residing in the territory are respected. For example, the Constitution grants citizens the right to vote and sets conditions such as a minimum voting age. The minimum voting age is 16 in Brazil, 18 in Canada, and 25 in the United Arab Emirates. Second, a constitution establishes the separation of powers and the state's political system. How will the executive, legislative, and judicial powers be separated between institutions? Will it be governed by a parliamentary system like Canada, a presidential system like the United States, or a mixed or semi-presidential system like France? Third, a constitution determines the different institutions that share legislative, executive, and judicial powers. For example, the House of Commons, the House of Representatives, and the National Assembly are all legislative institutions, but in different states. You can see how states can be similar in many ways, but different in others. One of the reasons for this is their constitution. In addition to defining rights and freedoms and establishing the political system and the institutions that share power, a state's constitution is also considered the most important law. All laws, treaties, and international agreements adopted by states must comply with their constitution. When a request is submitted to a state's justice system, namely the judicial branch, it judges whether a law that the government wants to pass contradicts the state's constitution. In this case, the new law is declared unconstitutional and does not come into effect. For example, if the government of Canada passes a law that targets education, the Quebec government can challenge it by declaring it unconstitutional, because in the Canadian Constitution, education is under the jurisdiction of the provinces, not the federal government. This means that the federal government would have acted unconstitutionally. Now, you know what one of the longest words in the English language means. Since each state adopted its constitution at different times, it's important to amend some or all of it in order to adapt it to today's context. For example, if Canada had kept its first constitution from 1763, the country would be ruled by the United Kingdom's monarchy. Since the 1982 Constitution was adopted, the government of Canada governs the country. Just like Canada, France has changed its constitution several times. If it had kept its constitution from 1804, it would still be a monarchy in which the power to rule would be passed on from father to son. Today, it is a democracy, and power is divided between the president and the prime minister. The United States has only had one constitution that was adopted in 1787. To keep it relevant, it has been amended 27 times. What is an amendment? It's a change to part of the Constitution that responds to today's needs and contexts. This means that the U.S. Constitution has 27 new laws. The most famous amendment is probably the 13th Amendment from 1865, which abolished slavery. But why didn't Canada and France just add amendments like the United States? Simply because their constitutions didn't allow it. That's why they changed them so often. Now, do you understand why a constitution is said to be the skeleton of a state? A constitution establishes a state's fundamental principles, whether they relate to the rights and freedoms granted to citizens, the political system, the division of powers, or the way laws are amended over time.